Tonight we've got a interesting section on Daniel 2. And I imagine you're all going, Daniel 2, right, okay, heard this before, lectures, Sunday school, parents have talked, like Daniel 2 seems to me to be a chapter that you've probably heard before. It's kind of done to death and you've heard it all before. So what is there to be gained out of Daniel 2 at another level? What can you see in Daniel chapter 2 that helps you to grasp the book of Daniel and change our lives in a different way? Well, let's just ask a few questions about Daniel chapter 2. So first of all, you know the story. It's about, the head of gold is a symbol of Babylon. And you know all the story. They used gold as a currency. The Medo-Persians, two kingdoms sort of side by side, therefore two arms. That was represented by the silver, and you know that because silver was one of the key currencies that they used. The legs and the thighs and belly were of brass, which is a symbol of Greece. And you go, yep, I've heard that in the lecture. The Greeks used brass as their common metal for armour. And then there's the legs of iron, which is a stronger metal, and the Romans used that as their weaponry, as their shields, as their armour, most stuff, in fact, because they were experts in iron. And finally, we've got iron and clay, which has divided Europe, and you go, yeah, okay, I know about this. Rome never actually got conquered. It just kind of, mingled with the peoples of the earth, and it's now like you've got this mixture. And today, clay is intimately used with the production of steel. It's intimately used with the production of just about anything that's done with concrete, is that you've got reinforcing mesh and concrete constructing just about everything you look at these days. So, you can go through that story, and probably if you sat next to someone on a bus, you could probably spin that story to them and say, hey, look, this is the Bible giving an amazing record of the whole of world history from this guy Daniel, who couldn't have possibly known all of that. Hey, what a great proof that the Bible's true. And I know some young people who've left the truth and come back, not because, things went well in their life, but because they couldn't argue with that chapter. Like I know someone personally who that's their reason for coming back. And impressively, they just were sitting there one day just going, I've left the truth, but that is so true. I can't argue with that. So what more can we actually see in this system? Well, I got some questions. When I was thinking about this, I was looking at it going, so how come this is all one image? First of all, it's a man. It's like this overview of the whole of prophecy from here on. If you don't know, you then go on in further into Daniel, and the story of each of those parts is now split up into different sections. And then finally, when you get down into Revelation, the whole detail is about the legs and the feet, the Roman section. So it's almost like this is the index page of prophecy right in front of you. And from here on in, the index links to all these different parts of Daniel and then all these different parts of Revelation. Why is it then that Daniel gives us a picture of a man image, whereas everything else is images of beasts? Like from here on in, it's all beasts, or perhaps a couple of trees and things, but generally speaking, it's all beasts. Why is this one consistent man? And when you think about that, that really doesn't make sense, because if you go to someone in this university and you say, hey, look, I've got this story about the whole of history, it's all interlinked, and there's all these different empires as one image, they go, pah, rubbish. They weren't one empire ever. You're telling me that the Persians were the Greeks. No, they weren't. They were conquered by the Greeks. Each one of those, except for the bottom, the feet, is a distinct and different empire. You're telling me there's something intimate connecting all of those empires from one end to the other? And the answer is yes. What is it then? Well, it's essentially that head of gold. When we talk about the body of Christ, what do we talk about? We talk about us being the body and Christ is the head, because all the thinking and all the blessings that come on the ecclesia come on us because we're the body of Christ, and it comes on that head and the thinking goes down into all the body. So what you see in this here is the thinking of Babylon goes down through the whole system as if it's one whole man all working together, and it's all interlinked. So even though these nations conquered each other, there's some fundamental idea that links them all together. Okay, what is this fundamental idea? Because fundamental ideas are really important to us, especially at this age in life, where you're looking for perhaps a cause, an identity. What sets you apart as being you? And that's a great thing, that we should seek for those things. People say, go out and find yourself. And people around us are going, hey, this is the time to do this. Young people should be standing up and finding a cause in life. Black Lives Matter. Stand up for the environment. Stand up for, I don't know, some cause and fight for it. And you think, wow, I'd really like to be known as somebody, so why don't I find a cause? Well, what we're forgetting if we do that is the Bible's giving you a cause. And I want tonight to show you that cause, because it's to fight against the idea which pervades that entire system. That's your cause, and you're called to be warriors. You're called to contend earnestly for the faith once delivered to the saints. That's the call. That's your cause. How many of you are there? Not many. The world's full of people who can go and fight for the environment things, won't save the planet. But the people who fight for this will change the world. And they'll change the world for the better. You know, it's a serious cause. I just want to impress you with how serious a cause it is, because we already know the Bible and we've grown up, so many of us, in the truth, as we say, going through Sunday school and so forth, we forget what a cause you've got, what a mission you've actually got. Let me try and put it another way. And this is something that strikes me very strongly. Let's say there's two crimes in the world. Which is the greatest crime? Is the greatest crime that we get someone and bang, he's dead? Okay, terrible crime, we murdered someone, their life's cut short, they've got nothing further to enjoy in life, they're gone. Or, number A on the screen, we can make the person be a devoted servant to us and to our aims. They crawl on their knees and they light candles and they do obeisance and they get up in the morning and they do their rosary and they pay their money, and it's just as much in Europe as your tax. And they come along, they kiss the foot of the statue and they give their entire life, stage by day, in service to a system which leaves you still dead in the grave, same as the other bloke, but with no real hope at all. So which is the worst crime? To knock someone off straight away, or to teach someone that they have a hope beyond this life, to make them serve for that purpose all through their life, and then it's nothing at the end after all. They've spent all of that time, all their life, for nothing. I reckon Group A is the greatest crime of all time. How many people have suffered from Group A crime, where you've spent your entire life for something that is nothing? Millions. Millions down through the ages. Why would someone do that? Like, what would drive someone? Like, James, you're telling me that there's some consistent conspiracy theory, that there's some grand high shebang guy who said, listen guys, for the next 6,000 years, we're going to deceive people and make them give up everything in their life, their money, their time, their energy, and then they're going to die without hope. This is a conspiracy and we'll all get together and club together and do it. And you're telling me that everyone down the line in that image empire said, yeah, we'll play along with that. We don't care that we're a different empire, we'll play along. It's not like that. Basically, the same spirit drives them. So even though the empires change and you go from Persia to Greece and from Greece to Rome, still the same motivation drives people that makes them perpetrate this greatest of all crimes. Crime A, spend your life for nothing. Hide the truth so that people spend their life on a lie. That's the greatest crime. It's basically like this. They actually have the truth. They know. Like for over 1,000 years, they could read the Bible and no one else could. And this system basically had a cure for death. Now, if you had a cure for cancer, right, if I gave you a little jar with 5 pills in it and they were a cure for cancer, and I said, now what I want you to do is walk from one end to the other of the local cancer ward, terminal cancer ward. And you walked from one end to the other and you never opened that jar and gave anyone, what sort of person are you? Now, this is a system which has the truth, the thing that saves you not from cancer, but from sin and death itself, and they hide it. That's the crime that we're talking about here. They hide the fact that people can come to know God for themselves. They hide the fact of what it takes to gain true forgiveness, to really find happiness in this life. Why do they do this? Why do they commit this great crime? All the kingdoms of men do the same thing. Well, they want this one thing. It's called dominion. And man was made to have dominion in a certain sense right back in the Garden of Eden. Here from Genesis, God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and so on and so on. And each group of people went, hey, I like the sound of that dominion thing. Maybe I could extend that over other people. How can we have dominion over other people? Well, that word dominion in the Hebrew is mashal, and it means to have mental superiority. Now, it doesn't mean that like, hey, I'm superior, like I'm high and mighty. It means to think better than someone else. So humans are supposed to be helpful to all the creation because they think better. They're able to think better than the creation. That's the way that they're given dominion over all the natural creation. We should be saving the planet because we can think out how to save the planet. That's the mission man's given. Man was never given a mission to have dominion over other men, except for 2 cases. The kings were given authority over the children of Israel, the kings of Israel, sorry, and fathers were given authority in their own household. There is no other place where anyone is given authority over any other person. That means anyone who takes dominion over someone else is a usurper. They're doing it without God's authority and right. And how do they do it? So God said, I want you to do it by having a mental superiority, and that's how you can help the planet. You have to have my character. That's the method of having dominion. And they went, nah, I've got a better idea, and this will give me dominion over other people. I can rule by violent oppression because I'm stronger than you. So because I'm bigger and stronger than you, I can have control and I can get what I want. So I can have my dominion. So I'm going to hide the truth from you. I'm going to enforce that you do what I say for my personal benefit, my personal gain. Oh, but there's another method. If that doesn't work, you can do it by deceit. You can use mystic deception. So we can talk people into believing that there's great mysteries out there. They really need to think that I'm the one who holds the keys of all wisdom. I tell them whether they're forgiven or not. I tell them how they should live their lives. And so there's the 3 different methods that you can have of gaining the dominion over other people. But only one of them is right. Only one of them is what God actually told us to do. And yet mankind does the other 2 because it means that they can perpetrate crime A. That they can be the ones who get gain out of other people. They'll be suppressed. It's for the suppression of the masses. It's for controlling the masses. That's the motive. So we've seen the crime. There's your motive, is they want dominion. And here's the method. They do it by deception. Okay, now what we're going to do for a bit of tonight is we're going to follow through, and this is like massively summarised. We're going to follow through some of these empires in the Daniel 2 thing and how they actually employed these different methods to control the masses, to get what they wanted. So this is a book on how do I get what I want in life 101. Okay, so first of all, there's this a great example with Abraham and Nimrod. So there's the first example laid out in Genesis. Now, for the sake of time, because we've got a fair bit of ground to cover, we won't turn it up. What was the promise that God made to Abraham? It's on the left there in blue. It's that you actually have the character of God, and if you do, I will make thy name great. If you have faith and believe in what I say, and that's how you live your life, then in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Oh, and if you want a place to live, then New Testament tells us that Abraham was a man who looked for a city whose builder and maker is God. So God set up Abraham and said, look, this is how I want you to live. I'll do everything for you. I'll give you all the blessings. You just work on having the character of that I've showed you. Nimrod comes along and he goes, no, let us make us a name. I'm going to do this by my strength. I'm not going to wait for God to make me a nation or a name. I'm going to make it for myself. Oh, and it's not a case of everyone being blessed because of God. Basically, what's going to happen is nothing will be restrained from us that we have imagined to do. And sorry, I've paraphrased that quote, as you can see. And so they went out and they said, let us build us a city and a tower. So this Nimrod character is going, hey, we're going to go against what God wants because we want to do things our way. We're going to rule by physical superiority rather than mental superiority. Who is this Nimrod guy? Is he the start of this kingdom of men? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this kingdom of men tonight, and where does it come from? Well, no, he wasn't the first. There was a guy before him called Cush. Okay, who's Cush and where does he come from? Well, you've got Noah, right? And God said to Noah, basically the world's been pretty bad before you. There's been a flood and wiped them all out. Now I'm going to make a covenant with you and you're going to sacrifice and you'll do things my way. And here's a whole lot of laws about how you look after creation. Did you realise that? God says to Noah, you can't just go killing animals just because anymore. There's consequences. So you've got to be a different sort of person, Noah, and everyone that follows you. So there's restraints put on everybody by this covenant that God's given. It's a good thing. It saves the planet. It saves going back to that age of violence and immorality that was before the flood. One of Noah's sons didn't turn out so well, and we won't go into detail, but he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, and Japheth got cursed, Ham got cursed because he was pretty naughty. Well, he had a son, and his son's name was Cush. And this Cush guy, if we dig around in history, is pretty interesting. He discovered all sorts of stuff like maths. He organised this idea of time and how things, the cycles of everything worked in life. And he's claimed to be the one who unlocked the mysteries of all of these things. And he made sure that people then, because of that special skill that he had, started to worship him as a deity. So he actually becomes known, the ideas that he started out, he became known as the one of the circle, the circular one. And he became known as Baal, Bel, or Sol, depending on which culture you're in. Now you're probably going, yeah, Baal I've heard of. Remember Elijah? Yeah, prophets of Baal. Sun god, remember? Because Baal was trying to call down fire from heaven, because Baal was the sun god. Right, now in Daniel, you'll hear a few people called Bel, Belteshazzar, stuff like that, because the key name of the gods was Bel. It's just a conversion. They just took on the name of this. His other name is Kronos later on, because he's the god of time and cycles. So this is what he was like, and he was this god of maths. By the way, there's a fascinating reference to it later. What happens to that king whose time is done? When his time is up, a hand writes on the wall, "Meeny, meeny, tickle, you fasten." And you go, yeah, okay, like I get what it means. You weighed in the balances, you're numbered and your days are up. Yeah, but why? Well, because of this. Because his God was the numbering God, the God of numbers, the God of time. So to write on the wall, you are numbered and you're found wanting in the scales, you're finished. The Persians will get you. So that was why it was written on the wall, because his God had no strength over the God of heaven. And that's what he was being told. Okay, so this Baal guy, we see him later on as the god of the sun. And every different culture had the god of the sun. And you go, why did they copy each other? I mean, seriously, wouldn't one of the cultures have gone, listen guys, we know that the previous culture told a whole lot of pagan nonsense, but it doesn't save you. It's selfish. It basically is self-driven. That paganism just benefits the priests and the people at the top. Seriously, guys, let's fight against this. Let's have some democracy here and stand up against this and all be free thinkers. Go back to what the Bible actually says. That let's find saving truth. But no. Each different culture along the way had the same selfish drive, and so they flogged off the ideas of others. So here's Helios, who's the god of the Greeks later on. And you can see on his head here, see if I can zoom in a bit, he's driving this wheel of fire across the sky, and see around his head, there's this halo with all the spikes on it, which is modelled on this halo here. And that's actually where halos actually come from. And the word halo itself comes from this guy. So that when you get to the pictures, here's a sort of Catholic symbol. Here's Jesus and God, or strangely, that looks a lot like Jesus, but this is both Jesus and God. And Mary here, they've all got these sort of rings around their head and these sort of spiky, spokey bits. Halos, wheels of fire. Because this Sol, or Baal, is the sun god. That's the symbol of them. By the way, you also notice that they're gold, because the god Bel, the god of the sun, was obviously the golden god. So they had this idea of being the one who was the golden god. Now, what did they do? Well, they said, remember how I've said that this religion is a perversion of the truth, and it takes away from people truly knowing God and truly finding forgiveness. Well, what they said is, to purge from sin, and you're all to blame for sin, the Bible doesn't blame you for Adam and Eve's sins. It says it's your misfortune, not your crime. But this guy says, no, it's your crime. And you need to pay for that. And the only way to purge from that is fire. So what we do is we take people and we cleanse them by fire, or at least one member of the community. So you ever wondered, why on earth did they have Molech burning children to the fire? And the answer is because the worship of Baal, or his other incarnation Molech, was that if you burn one of the king's children, then basically it purges the sin, Adam and Eve's sin, by the way, not necessarily yours, but your sin for the group of people. It's still practiced even in later times. There's records of the Druids, who would, kind of looks like Glenlock, I know, but you're not supposed to do this at Glenlock. The Druids would actually go out into the fields and they'd get a shepherd's hat and they'd put in it pieces of bread, and one of the pieces of bread is charred. I'm talking only 100 years ago. They probably still practice it now. It's probably getting popular again. They pull out these pieces of bread and they go, this one's charred, right, it's your turn. And you have to then jump through the fire, and if you come out the other side completely unharmed, then it's good luck for the rest of us and purges the rest of us of our sins. So it came right down to the Druids of England, this concept of burning in the fire. The French had it, where they'd actually take people across the fire and they'd throw children across these fiery things on St. John's Day. The Fijians even have a version of it with their fire walkers. It's to purge from sin, is worship of the sun god. So this is this Cush guy, and he's telling you the great crime. The great crime is right here. It's buried in this teaching, because instead of God who says, I will forgive you if you listen to me, if you obey me, and you love me, this guy says, we hate you because of Adam and Eve's sin, and if you burn some kids, I'm good with that. You can pay for your crimes. How horrible is that? Do you hate that? Seriously, we get upset about people who hurt animals, and so we should. That's what humans are called to do. But what about this? What about teaching people that if you burn yourself, you give forgiveness of sins for people around you? I mean, seriously, you think this is an old-fashioned crime. It's gone. They wouldn't do that these days, would they? They wouldn't worship the sun. They wouldn't worship the holy fire, would they? I mean, that's out. Or is it? It's still the same system that teaches you that you should light candles and purge yourself from sins by their method, by their ways. So this was Cush, right? So he's the master god, right? Then comes along his son, and we know about him because he establishes the land of Shinar. If you're looking in Daniel, go back to chapter 1 and verse 2, and there's this weird thing that when the Jews come into the land of Israel, it's called the land of Shinar, and you're going, why? Seriously, it's not called Shinar. It hasn't been called Shinar for hundreds of years. Why does Daniel call it Shinar? And the answer is because it was last called Shinar when this guy called Nimrod set up his kingdom back in Genesis chapter 10. So it's reminding us back of that. Now, what does Shinar actually mean? Well, in the Hebrew tongue, Shinar means the enemy's bite or the enemy's tooth. You're being told, straight out, no questions, land of the seed of the serpent. This is what the kingdom of men was about. But do you know what it means in Chaldee? It means the regenerator, going around a cycle and coming back around again. And that's what their symbol was, their circle symbol of Bel was. In fact, the 0, the actual circular number, the origin number where everything starts from, comes from Bel, the circle. You'll see the circle as we go through this, not only in this guy holding it up in front of himself, but Egyptians had it. You'll see that later we're going to have a picture with the thing on their head and the sun disk of gold that the Egyptians had. It's all over the place. We'll get back to the sort of 0 later on. So that's Cush. Along comes Nimrod, and he's going to start the land of Shinar, which means the enemy's bite. And we're told of Nimrod, I don't know if you can read that, but Genesis 10 says, Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before Yahweh, therefore it says, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. Bible never repeats itself, unless there's a really good reason. So what does it say the same thing twice? Because it's really pointing us at that phrase, Nimrod, the mighty hunter before Yahweh. And the word for before is actually a little bit, it doesn't really carry the full meaning. It actually means, we would translate these days as, in your face. So God said, right, hey, look, after the flood, don't just madly go out and kill animals, because before the flood, what had happened is I made man someone who would care for the planet, and instead you turn to violence. Now after the flood, I want you to actually care for animals and don't just kill them for no good reason. And Nimrod says, excuse me for saying this, in your face, God. In fact, the word Nimrod means to rebel. And in some tongues, it means we will rebel. So that's his spirit. His spirit is, in your face, God. You said don't kill animals. I'll see which ones I can kill the best. So when you go actually into Babylon and Assyria, you find all these pictures of guys killing lions. It's like all over the walls because, hey, if we're the master killer, what's the biggest and nastiest animal we can kill? Lions, no worries. So we just glorify the fact that they killed lions. Now, he was actually probably pretty popular for that because later on you find that the people weren't allowed to go back into Israel straight away. God said, I'll get the people out of the land gradually for you because otherwise the lions will take over and you need some defence. You need to push the lions out of the land of Israel gradually. So lions in those days and really decent-sized wild beasts were a bit of a danger. You didn't have like an elephant gun that you could put a 50 cal through their head. So if you didn't have that, some guy who comes along and starts killing lions for you, he might have been kind of popular because, hey, he freed people from the stress of actually having to be scared of animals. So maybe he was kind of popular for that, but he did it in the face of God because God had said, hey, I don't want you just killing animals. And he said, hey, this is my sport. This is what I do for fun on my day off. What else did Nimrod do? Well, he started being the one who unified people. And he unified people with fortifications and walls. So back in Genesis, we won't go there. It says that he's got three different kingdoms, three different cities, right? There's Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and all these cities were put together as one city called Babylon. And what did that entail? Well, what it entailed was putting a massive wall of fortification around the outside. Freed you from the wild beasts again. Didn't have to worry about that. You had some peace and quiet. No lions could knock on your back door. So that was good, you know. So he was popular again. But what he's done is he's unified people. And some of the gods you'll find later on are called the unifiers, the people who bring together. And also he's the encircular. He's the god of fortifications. Now, we're going to get to it in a minute. Nimrod actually gets knocked off. He gets killed. And his wife actually gets the credit for some of the work that he actually does. And so what she gets is she's called the one who builds the walls. And you can probably see just up here, this is a picture of Astarte, or a later version of Astarte. And what on earth is that? I mean, look at this. She's got a castle sticking out the top of her head. What is that? And the answer is it's castle. It's the word for tor. Or a circular building is from which we get fortifications is actually the word that's actually built into her name, Ashtorte or Astarte. So the word for Tor means the goddess of fortifications. So she kind of got the credit for that one. And so they made this land of Shinar where they pulled everything together. Oh, and he did this other thing actually. You notice he didn't just build walls, he built towers. And he was pretty big on this tower idea. First of all, I'm going to go back and say he did war. He actually started war. Some of the historians say that before Nimrod came along, there actually was peace. People dwelt without walls because they didn't need them. Nobody learnt war. No one was educated in how to fight because they didn't have to. And Nimrod comes along and goes, hey, I've got a cool idea. Let's start hunting against lions, and then maybe we could go one step better. We could fight against other people with horses. And so he goes out and he starts fighting with horses, and he's now the divider. So he brings people together. He's the unifier by fortifications, but he's also the conqueror and divider. And the symbol of him is always used with a club and as the king of the centaurs. Now, where's this centaur thing come from? Well, you know it's from the people who, when they first saw these guys on horseback coming over the hill towards them, they were so freaked out they thought they were one animal. They'd never seen anyone riding a horse before. And so the myth of the centaur came about probably because Nimrod's troops, or let's just say the movement that Nimrod started of war, actually initiated this idea. He actually had trained servants. Before that, there just wasn't war. He started the whole game of warfare, and he's going out fighting against people who had no idea about fighting because they never bothered, they never needed it. So here's where his sort of might is going. He's gone downhill fast. He started out by sort of defending people by killing lions, and now he's going down this line of actually being the one who wars against people. Oh, and I said he built towers. Now, why does he build a tower? It's always been a bit of a mystery, and I've always wondered about that. So I did a bit of research, is why on earth did he build this tower? I mean, what's it for? Well, apparently the tower was there to try and separate between heaven and earth. And you go, why? Well, because what mankind felt was that God's bands were binding them under his control. And basically, Nimrod means to rebel. And what man wanted was freedom. Freedom not just to be themselves, but to be sinful. To do what God said you didn't have to do. So Nimrod's starting to go the final step in his journey of his life. He starts introducing this idea of separating between God and man. And if we separate between God and man, push God away, we can do whatever we want because God is further away from us. Psalm 1 actually picks up on this and says that mankind says, let us cast their bands asunder and break their bands asunder and cast their cords from us. So there was this rainbow that was like God's covenant with them, and they turn around and say, forget that. We feel like God is actually pressing down on us. Now, there's a Polynesian myth. What happens is all of these stories go all around the world. This is the other proof that this is one consistent system, is that you can find these same myths almost perfectly replicated with a few variations in almost all different cultures. Here's a picture, not the Disney version, of Maui. Maui. And he's actually doing something really interesting. He's pushing the sky away from the earth. So the Polynesian story was that God was too close to man, and man felt it cramped his style. In fact, he could only walk in a bowed down position. He pretty much had to crawl. And he got a bit jack of that. So he said, I want some freedom. I want some freedom to sin, thank you very much. So Maui came along and he, by degrees, pushed the sky up away from the earth so that man felt that he was distanced from the gods above him. So he didn't have to do what the gods said. There was a distance put between them. You can't actually tell that unless you're given a high vantage point, how far the sky is. So by building a tower, you gave this idea of separation. There's a heaps cooler version of it later on with Atlas. And it's interesting with Atlas, sometimes you see him actually lifting the world, but some of the early versions have this, is Atlas actually lifting the sky. And he's separating between God and man. So that's what Nimrod basically did, is he said, hey, let's rebel. By building a tower, we can get religious freedom. And in fact, you think I'm wrong, that's actually what the angels are worried about. They actually say, hey, they're building a tower. The problem is now nothing will be restrained from them that they imagine to do. And you go, how does that relate to building like a tower? This is how. Their concept was, if we push God away from man, we can do our own thing. So we can separate ourselves. Well, what happened to Nimrod after that? Well, we don't have it in the Bible, but history shows us that what actually seemed to happen is Nimrod got caught. Some people decided that Nimrod had gone too far, and they took Nimrod, and as the story goes, I've got no biblical record for this, but I'll show you some interesting connections. They decided they got a council together. The first council was to decide whether he should die for his blasphemies by saying we should get rid of God's restraints. And the second council was, how should he die? Because if we actually just kill him and give him a nice burial, people will worship him. So what they did is they decided, we'll kill him, but two, we'll cut him into a whole stack of, sorry, this is really gruesome, sorry ladies, cut him into lots of pieces and share those pieces out through the kingdom in boxes. So they posted these, a postal system sent out bits of Nimrod through the world. And you go, hang on a minute, that rings an interesting bell. No pun intended. Wasn't that what Samuel did to Agag? Have you ever wondered why Agag doesn't just, stick a sword in Agag? But no, he hews him in pieces. A lot of effort for an old bloke to go to. Unless what you're trying to do is you're trying to show that this guy's not just dead, but this is what he deserves. No respect, no credit, no honour at all. And this is their way of showing it. And Saul and Samuel also picked up on this. They cut the the heifer in pieces, remember? Or the concubine later in that horrible story. And it was a disgrace. It was a terrible thing that this heifer being cut in pieces and sent all around. So that was the symbol of what happened. It's been suggested happened to Nimrod. So hey, that sounds pretty final. This sounds like the end of the whole game of the kingdom of men. I mean, really, you're going to stand up after this for being someone who says, I want to rebel, I want to do things my way for my own personal benefit, by my own personal might and strength. You'd think twice, wouldn't you? Well, there was a certain lady who did think twice, and her name was, well, it's suggested that her name was Semiramis. And who she was exactly is hard to say, but she decided that she'd shift gears. We'll switch from, might to mystic deception. Let's try that for a go and see if we can control the minds of men by mystic deception. Frankly, she had a heck of a lot more success rate than Nimrod did with his method of rule by might. And so what she did is she made up the story, and the story goes that she resurrected Nimrod, or the old Nimrod. She brought him back to life. In fact, she pinched her story from the most important critical story about truth in the Old Testament, Genesis 3:15, 16. She pinched it from the story of the Son being the Saviour, of him being hurt on the heel, which was a temporary wound, and coming back to life. The story of the resurrected Son, and she pinched that story and corrupted it. What for? So that she could give people forgiveness and salvation? Personal gain. She didn't want to lose control. She'd had a great time when Nimrod was around and things weren't so good. Now he was dead and everyone sort of looked down on him. So what she did is she organised his resurrection. So how do you do it? This is the Egyptian version of it, and like I said, all of these things are replicated in almost all different cultures along the way. The Egyptian version was that this guy, interestingly called Set, sort of really awkward echo with the name Seth, and some have used that to indicate that maybe it was Seth that actually killed Nimrod, like the Seth from earlier. But this guy called Set tricked the Nimrod figure, whose name in their story is Osiris, into killing him. They put him in a sarcophagus, and when he was in there, he died, and they chopped him into pieces, and he went into the underworld. And then the mother goddess went down into the underworld, and she did this thing called the mourning, the weeping. And she was sad for the loss of her husband, Osiris, or version of Baal. Why would you be upset? Why would you mourn for him? He's the one who's corrupted the truth. He's taken away truth from people and given them a perverted version of the truth for his own purposes. Why would you cry for him? Unless you want what he wanted, which is to be able to sin and rebel against God's truth, to live your self-centered way instead of having to live it by God's character. And that's her motive. So she wept, and the story of her weeping is that she weeps for the great times that she used to have when Nimrod was around. So then she finds that Nimrod's coffin has been placed in a tree, in this magic tree of, should we call it a tree of life? And so this magic tree's taken the coffin inside it. So she cuts the tree down, and it's been floating in the Nile. She pulls it out of the Nile. This is the Egyptian version. Pulls it out of the Nile, and she does her magic on it. And out comes a reborn version of the old king. And the Egyptian one is called Horus, but the ancient one was called Tammuz. So this story of resurrecting a son by her magic and pulling him out of the Nile is her little story that she spun to deceive people. It's brilliant. It flogs off the essential and classy elements out of Genesis 3:15. And we know this is the case because, hey, you look at the Moses story. Have you ever wondered why the daughter of Pharaoh goes down to the river, she pulls this baby out, and she goes, he looks different, and she goes, he's in a basket, and the word for basket was that it was pitched. It was like an ark, so it's like a black box like a coffin is the Egyptian version of the word. She pulls him out and she goes, yeah, no worries, make this guy the king of Egypt. You go, really? Well, what inspired you to do that? The answer is, she's just living out the legend. That's all she's doing. She's got the legend in mind. She's going, hey, we'll just run through the legend. And if I run through the legend, who am I in the legend? I slot into the queen picture. All good. This baby will do for me. Suits my purposes. So that's why the Moses thing, you've got this weird bit where they get, it's a Hebrew. Weren't they supposed to kill all the Hebrews? But no, she pulls it out the river and goes, I'm going to make this guy the next Pharaoh. Really, why? So there's this mourning for Tammuz. She brings them out, and the pictures of her in the Babylonian system, picture her with a branch in her hand, and she's the bringer of new life from the tree of life. By her magic, she brought back the Son of God from the dead. Now, you know and I know this goes all the way through to our day, because the day she brings him back, he is the sun god after all, is December 25th. December 25th got nothing to do with Jesus at all. In fact, they celebrated this resurrection of the sun god yonks before Jesus was even around. Because, hey, this is what it's about, it's about the return to life of the party guy. The guy who says, let's rebel, let's do selfish things. So of course they're going to celebrate that. And in fact, when you look at the Christmas celebrations, they used to have this whole thing about celebrating and letting your hair down. The slaves were made king for the day and coated in a purple robe, all this sort of stuff went on. Because it was nothing to do with celebrating Christ, it was the rebirth of the party guy. And that's what they're excited about. The sun god has come back to life. You know that the solstice in that country, the winter, is when the sun gets to its lowest ebb. December 25th is when it starts to rise again. It's still the sun worship, because this is the rebirth of the sun. And the pictures of the woman holding the child now become the critical pictures of religion down through history. In fact, I don't know if anyone's been on a trip to Europe, but if you go through Europe, you'll find that there's actually barely any temples or cathedrals to God. They're all to Mary, or maybe Jesus, none to God. Because God the Father just faded out of the picture. The mother now becomes the key figure in the story and in almost every culture, as we'll see. And she's the one with the branch in her hand. You don't have to go to Christ, the judge of all, they said. Go and appeal to the mother. She's the one. She'll speak to Jesus for you. She'll speak to God for you. And she'll give you the relief that you want from your sins. You just have to do her thing. There's a whole lot of naughty, immoral stuff that went on involved in this as well. And that's why they had the magic trees. You hear in the times of Israel, they cut down the groves. They were trees, because her symbol of bringing new life was these magic trees. She carried a tree in her hand, and the theory is that's how she resurrected her husband. It's almost like ripping off the story of Genesis to the point where it says it's not God that gives you access to the tree of life, it's this woman, and she gives it to you by some very naughty religious ceremonies. So there's this whole idea of this tree, and this tree of life, which has been pulled straight from Genesis, and she's offering people Shinar, rejuvenation, regeneration. That's what she offered people, and she couldn't give it. It's absolute fraud. She's only doing it for her own purposes. She probably did it to maintain the throne, but it became such a popular story that the images of the woman and child go through almost every culture as their key goddess. Here it is in Egypt, and pixelated, yes, because it's dodgy idolatry stuff. So there you go, there's Isis, there's Osiris, and there's the sun there, Horus. Straight out of the pagans, the stuff of today. There we are, there's our picture before of Mary and Joseph, or Jesus the Father, God the Father, and Jesus the Son. Oh, and notice here, see what she's got around her head. Part of the magic she used is the sun disk. Oh, but these guys have still got it too. There's the sort of halo thing around their head as well. So there's this story that goes on down through the different ages of this mass deception. This is the biggest crime of all history. You think about other crimes of history, deceiving people in some area, teaching them that sugar's good for you or something. Well, this just takes the cake in every sense. This is such a greater crime, and we've got to get ourselves heartily upset about it because God is. So the symbol at the end is, here she is. She's the one that's symbolised by the moon, the counterpart of the sun, and they pictured her as standing on the serpent. So she's the one who overcomes the serpent. Not Genesis 3:15, where the son overcomes the serpent. They've made the woman overcome the serpent. Oh, here she is. She's got the stars of heaven around her head because she's the queen of heaven. And in lots of pictures, the light shines out from behind her of the sun. And she's holding in her hand the branch, the symbol of the child that she brings forth. You know, in the Bible, worship of her is distinctly condemned. You've got to realise this is why God punished his people in the first place. Jeremiah says, the children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, the women knead the dough, they make cakes to the queen of heaven, they pour out the drink offerings. So they do all of these things. By the way, you notice there's a fire that they had to do because it was a worship of fire. And part of her magic that she had was she'd take this tree and she'd regenerate life in it. So they used this holy tree and they cut the bottom of it and throw it on the fire. And then at the evening time, they burn this roots and the base, the stump of the tree on the fire. And then the next day, they'd set up the rest of the tree, decorated in their household, a fir tree usually, and they'd decorate it in their household and put all sort of bits of gold and stars all over it. It was a Christmas tree. Dead set. The Christmas tree was used in Jeremiah's time, and Jeremiah was dead against it. Oh, and they made Christmas cakes. Oh, and they poured out their wine, their drink offerings to the Queen of Heaven. Christmas was condemned by Jeremiah. And yeah, but it's a lot of fun, isn't it? But it's part of the great deception. You're contributing to the great time, the crime of all ages. You're part of it, if you keep it. Now, what about this? And Ezekiel's brought to the doors of the gates of the house, and they're looking towards the north, and they sat there, the women, weeping for Tammuz. They're weeping in the very place of the temple. They're crying out for the freedoms of an immoral life. That's what the weeping for Tammuz was. You know, this stuff is roundly condemned in the Bible if you want to dig for it. It's all there. And yet it still exists. It still lives on today, this great deception. Okay, so we've seen this. This is basically the idea of the Trinity. It says that we're told that life eternal is to know thee, the only true God. These guys say, no, we'll corrupt the picture because it suits us. And that goes on down through time. So if we were to look at the Egyptians, you can see here in the middle you've got your Osiris, Seth and Horus crowd in the middle. Oh, by the way, they made the nasty guy, the evil guy, the devil, called Seth. Fascinating if he was actually the guy who killed Nimrod. And they added a whole lot of extra guys to that, and extra people to that, but these were the key ones here in Egypt. So they followed along with the story. What about down the line in the Empire of Babylon? Did it carry on from there? Did they do the same thing? Well, yeah, the Babylonians flogged it off. There's Baal. He's got two faces because he lived twice. There's Nimrod there, and there's Semiramis with her wings and the power of the spirit, recovering someone, with a tree here from the underworld. So there's all sorts of symbols in that which we've talked about. They just perpetuated the same lesson. Now these guys are interesting. This is the Persians. So the Persians were the chest and arms. Now, what did the Persians believe in? They had their master guy Zoroaster, who taught them Zoroastrianism. And if you meet someone today who's a Parsi from Persia, that's their religion. And what's he passing over? This is the great king, awesome name, Ahura Mazda. How's that? And he's passing over the right of rule to the king of the day using a symbol of a ring, a circle. That's the Baal symbol. See, and by the way, he's got the club. The club was the symbol of the conqueror, the destroyer, the Baal guy who was the conqueror of the world, and the symbol there was a club. And if we go through all their stuff, they worshipped the holy fire. So the fire was the key idea that they worshipped. And they've got themselves, their mother, their father, and their son gods in that same sort of pantheon. So they've grabbed the same sort of tools in order to deceive all nations. That's your Persians. Okay, well, what about your Greeks? So your Greeks later on will be symbolised by the spotted leopard. Well, they're just loaded with them. They kind of expanded the story, and here's just a little grab bag of some of their deities. And what you can see is that the ideas of this pagan myth that's deceived all people have been spread out into lots of different gods, but there's all sorts of links to them. There's Zeus, the father, the mother, and later on, there's Apollo, the resurrected son. He comes back. And there's basically this guy who's the warrior god, so they've got to have one of those, and a builder god. Go back to your Baal in your mind. Yeah, he was a warrior. He was a builder. Oh, and there's Nike, who has the ring of victory that she gives to people. Oh, there's Hades, the evil punisher, the new version of Seth. And then you've got Hercules, the kind of hero guy. And what's he carry around? What does he actually fight people with? Darn it, it's a club. Seen one of them before. And what does he wear on his head? Oh, the sign of his prowess in fighting is a lion skin. And we haven't got time to dig into Hercules, but basically all the stuff that we've seen before is replicated in the stories of Hercules. And what about the great Roman system at the end? Well, this just goes on and on. But what we find is interesting is they just flogged off the Greek mythology. So I don't know if you can see it there because it's small print, but they've got the Greek Zeus and they've converted him into Jupiter. Gera is converted into Juno. Poseidon is turned into Neptune. Hades is Pluto. So they just kind of rebadged him. So this idea of rebadging the previous gods comes along. Why would you do that if you knew that this was the great deception? The deception that takes people's lives and never gives back. That takes people's whole life in service and then you die with no hope. Why would you do that? Because it benefits. There's benefits. And that's the whole motive, the mindset behind the kingdom of men. Oh, here's a cool one that's kind of relevant for now. So we've got Aphrodite or Venus, right? Again, a lot of pixelation needed for this particular picture. Do you know that they actually believed that what actually happened with Venus or the other goddess before her, that was her counterpart, is that she fell down from heaven in an egg or a meteor rock, and she fell down into the river Euphrates. And the doves settled upon it, the symbol of Juno, and brought her to shore, and it opened up, and out of that egg came all life. And you're going, they've ripped off the Noah story. What does the Noah story teach? The Noah story teaches baptism, that forgiveness is by God's method of giving up your selfishness and starting a new life of selflessness. And they went, no. We're going to put Venus, we're going to put Aphrodite in the egg, and she's going to pop out and she's going to initiate all life. You can figure out how for yourself. And so that's the Easter egg. The Easter egg is the mother of all life coming down to earth. And you go, nah, give me a break. Oh yeah? What about her counterpart, Diana of the Ephesians? Where did she come from again? Oh yeah, everybody knows, they said of Diana of the Ephesians, she fell down from heaven. That's your story. You want to perpetuate that myth? Okay, so there's some of the stories. It just goes on and on. And look, we could seriously spend all night and more. The stories of how this myth actually perpetuates just goes on and on and on through all the different systems. But we've got to wind up. And what I hope you might have gained out of tonight is a hearty, I'm going to say it, hatred. Because this is the lie that costs the world millions of lives. It's not just about killing people, it's about deceiving their life away. And we're the ones that are told the truth about it. It's not even their fault, half of them. Half of them are honest people who are genuinely deceived. It's not as if it's an organised system from one end to the other that organises amongst themselves to do this. It's just, they're all just made of the same stuff. They're just driven by the same motives of, hey, let's have dominion by mysticism. How do we do that? Borrow off the culture before. What are we asked to do? You want a cause. You want a reason to be who you are. Daniel had a reason to stand against the things. And you're going to see that word stand come up. He took a stand. The question are, who are you? Do you take a stand for truth? Because what we're called to do, and I take from a different translation, where Jude says that he'd fully intended to write a letter about the common salvation. What Jude would have loved to have done is written to people about how wonderful the salvation we have is and how it reaches out to all, but I feel compelled to make my letter to you an earnest appeal to put up a real fight for the faith, or as another translation says, to earnestly contend for the faith that is once and for all committed to those who belong to Christ. Another translation says, to those of past times. For they are men who have surreptitiously entered the church, but who have for a long time been headed straight for the condemnation. They have no real reverence for God. They abuse his grace as an opportunity for immorality, and they will not recognise the only Master, Jesus, our Lord. That's my challenge. That's the challenge of Daniel. Daniel's basically seeing this whole empire, and it upset him. You'll find out later in Daniel that he gets so upset he can't eat. He can't do anything. He can't talk. He's just so upset because what upset him about this system is the driving force behind it. It's selfish. It took away peace from the earth. It took away that granny's life who crawled on her knees to kiss the foot of the statue of Peter for nothing. She spent her whole life counting rosary beads for what? For someone else's pockets. To line this system's pockets with gold. And God's going to destroy that system. He's going to take a stone cut out without hands. You know, the whole point of the story of it being the seed of the woman is this point. It's not man's doing. That was what we saw right from Abraham. Abraham had to rely on God's doing. And what the seed of the woman, the whole point of the seed of the woman is it's not man's achievement, it's going to be God's. And we're told in Daniel chapter 2, if you haven't learnt verse 44 off by heart, go home and learn it tonight by heart, because you will find this quote is a brilliant quote for teaching the truth. And what it says is that stone's going to be cut out, it's actually verse 45, is cut out of the mountain without hands. It's not man's doing that's going to destroy this. It's going to be destroyed by God. Where are you going to stand when that day happens? And it could be tomorrow. It seriously could. Where are you going to stand? Are you going to be the person who says, hey, it was a bit of fun? You know, I got in with what the world said because it was a chance to rebel, it was a chance to let my hair down. I mean, I wouldn't say that out loud, but that's how it works. Is that what we stand for? Or do we look into the great light of truth and see the truth that actually saves, not just pretends to save, but actually saves, and say, I'm on that side? Because if you're not on that side, you're going to find it really hard when you see thousands of people killed, because it's going to happen. Like literally in maybe next year, there's going to be a huge earthquake, and there's going to be thousands of people die, there's going to be a huge war, and it's all going to be against this system, because this system stands up against God and Christ goes to fight it. Whose side are you on? Do you really know that you're on God's side or not? And would you make a stand? Would you stand there and say, yes, I'm happy to see thousands killed because it's that system that's got to be cleaned out of the earth? Would you do that? Because you're going to have to make a choice, and make it real soon. So young people, stand with Daniel and make a choice to be people who stand up for God's way and for truth.